The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Commanders as of 2022, Commanders now, and according to the owner, Commanders forever. Deal with it. Yes, I know Josh Harris opened the door a crack when he was introduced as the owner in 2023, but yesterday he slammed that door shut. A lot of kvetching about that. Polls are indicating that fans aren't happy with the name. But I think if you're a fan, you got to be happy with an appearance in the NFC Championship game in the first year. So you move on. And I have been ready to move on for some time. If you're not ready to move on, just call them the Washington football team. It's okay. And they're supposed to have some new logos and new uniforms that are going to reflect the past. So, eventually you get past these things. And, I'll do some more on that coming up. But this was the definitive question and answer as part of a lengthy news conference that was conducted by Josh Harris yesterday in Ashburn.
Is it safe to say the Commander's name is around just to stay? Is that safe to say from your standpoint?
Yes. And we're actually, I think it's now being embraced by our team, by our culture, by our coaching staff. And so, we're going with that.
Boom. We're going with it. So, look, I remember when the Bullets changed to Wizards in 1997. And let's look at a little timeline here. The Bullets came from Baltimore in 1973. Now, they were a quasi-local team when they played in Baltimore. It was just up the road. They played at the Civic Center. Tickets were available. I remember going with my dad when I was a kid. Used to be able to take a bus from Silver Spring, and they would include that as part of the ticket price. But when they moved to the Capitol Center, the brand-new Capitol Center in 1973, they were actually the Capitol Bullets, trying, I guess, to hang on to some of the fan base from Baltimore, but by the next year, they were the Washington Bullets. So from 1973 to 1997, they were the Bullets. That's 24 years. In 1997-98 season, they became the Wizards. That's 24 years. So there's a generation of people who never knew Bullets, and maybe there's still some that are hanging on to the idea they'll eventually become the Bullets again. No, they won't. They won't. Abe Pollin's widow, as a matter of fact, did an interview with the Washington Post and said she was open to that idea because they'd had so much fun owning the Bullets when they were good, 1978 and 79 when they made it to the finals. But that's not coming back. And I have relatives in Baltimore. My wife grew up there. She went to Colts games as a kid with her family. And the Colts left, of course, in 1984. They didn't get football back until 1996, so it was like 14 years, something like that, 13, 14 years. And she has cousins who are Colts fans, but their kids are my kids' age. They're in their 30s. They have no recollection of the Colts, and they're Ravens fans. They've moved on. I have two grandchildren, 2.5-year-old granddaughter and a month-old grandson. They won't know anything but Commanders. They won't know about the Redskins, which they'll hear Grandpa wax poetic about from time to time, and the glory days of the 80s when they were going to Super Bowls on a regular basis. But it won't mean anything to them. So turn the page. Turn the page on this. If you don't like Commanders and that prevents you from rooting for this football team, I feel bad for you because it looks like they're going to be good. They got a quarterback who's going to be around, hopefully, for the next 10, 12, maybe 15 years and keep them as a team that's contending for the Super Bowl on a regular basis and maybe winning a couple along the way. They've got good ownership here. They've got a general manager, a young general manager, and Adam Peters, who I think is going to be around here for a long, long time. And we'll see with Dan Quinn. Coaches change, but we've also seen coaches have long, long runs. And, maybe he becomes a guy like, like Bill Belichick. That would be the greatest, right? But there have been coaches that stay a decade or more, and maybe that happens as well. So you got to move on from this. And Josh Harris, in discussing the name change, went into further detail on why he thinks it's a good idea that they hang on to Commanders.
Now, in this building, the name Commanders means something. It means that, it's about players who love football, are great at football, hit hard, mentally tough, great teammates. And so It's really meaningful. That name is growing in meaning. And so, but as far as rebranding and bringing our past, which obviously I grew up with, and all the Super Bowl championships and our future together, you're going to see us head back towards, honoring our past and bringing it together with our future.
Here's what I wonder about. You may remember this last offseason, even before training camp started. Dan Quinn wore a T-shirt one day that had a W with a feather hanging off of it. It was not an official NFL property. And I wonder if that was a trial balloon. And given how they've made some concessions to the family of the designer of the logo in 1972, that logo is not coming back, by the way, with the Indian head. That's not going to happen. Possibly, I say possibly, when they do throwback uniforms, they might wear it, but I don't think so. But I would not be surprised if that becomes the new logo, the W that they have now with the feather hanging off of it, and they will be called Commanders. And I think that might be a good compromise. I also think that the uniforms that they wore for, I think it was 79 or maybe 80 when they started wearing them, and they wore those through the 2019 season, so, that's a long, long time. I think those uniforms will come back in a more representative way of what they had during the glory years. I don't know if they look exactly like that, but something like that. And those uniforms, only later on did they say Redskins on the front. For a long time, there was no name on the front of the jersey. I think they have Commanders or no name, which is fine. I think that would probably be a better way to do it. As the late mayor once said here, Marion Barry, get over it. Move on. It's time to get going here. Also yesterday, and talk about two really big news conferences, one local and one national, Roger Goodell held his news conference that he holds every year at the Super Bowl. They used to call it the State of the Game Address. I don't know what they call it now. Kurt Menefee was kind of interviewing him. I go back to the days of Pete Rozelle, where he'd stand up at the podium and deliver like a short statement on the league, light up a cigarette and go, "What do you got?" And he'd answer questions for about an hour. Paul Tagliabue did that. And Goodell did that for a while, but I remember going to his first news conference and thinking, boy, this guy is a boob. He's not in the same league as Tagliabue, and certainly not Rozelle, who made the league what it is today. And it was all about, the first one was about the Spygate with the Patriots. And I thought, God, he's expecting people to believe this nonsense. His take on how they handled Spygate was they asked the Patriots to turn over everything they had in, taping and other materials that they were using to steal signs. And the league, as he said, destroyed them. And he said, we knew it would be over if no other materials surfaced. And I thought, God, what a dope. And he's very successful dope in terms of his salary and the amount of money that he's earning for the league, but in many ways I still think he's a dope. But I did like what he said yesterday concerning the stadium for D.C. We'll get to what Josh Harris said about it. He's clearly wants it to be in D.C., but they're still in the stage of, working out deals, so he's not going to rule out Maryland and Virginia. We'll get to more of what he said in a moment. But this was Goodell with the question from Nikki Jhabvala of the Post.
Is it important for the league to have the team play in the district?
Well, I think it's important for the team to play in an area that is beneficial for the fans. It's going to be beneficial for those communities, and it's going to be beneficial to the team. I'm also a kid who grew up in Washington, D.C., going to RFK Stadium, and I remember that experience. And I see that stadium site today. I went by it when I was down in Washington in December, and frankly, it's really it's disappointing. It made me sad to see that area and how the stadium looks today and how that community looks. I think a new stadium there can be a huge economic driver. I think it would be great for our nation to be able to see a new stadium there with the stadium and with the monuments and the Capitol in the background. I remember that as a kid growing up. The power of that vision and what it means to that community, I think, is a really powerful thing. So if it turns out that that is the best alternative, I think it'd be a great thing.
Well, the push is on from the league, clearly. When Goodell was in town, I'm trying to remember which game it was, might have been the Tennessee game. But anyway, the next day, he and Josh Harris went down and lobbied at Congress. They pressed some flesh to get people interested in this. And, one thing led to another, and then we had that decision at 1:30 in the morning that, D.C. is going to have control of the land, and now they're free to make a deal with the Commanders to build a stadium there. So for me anyway, that's a good thing. I think for most fans of the team, they feel the same way. Eric Flack of Channel 9 has done a really good job of following this story and breaking news on it. And he was at the news conference yesterday that Harris had in Ashburn and questioned him along those lines of, we're here. How do we get to there where the commissioner now is saying it would be great for the nation if they build it in D.C.?
Emails from the city show that you personally called Chuck Schumer trying to get the RFK bill passed, and that you personally called with Jason Wright, Wes Moore, to try and get Maryland to back off. How do you look at somebody from Maryland and say you're seriously still considering Maryland when you seem to be so laser focused, including that picture in the Oval Office, on a DC option?
Look, I would say that Maryland's been amazing. Governor Moore and his team have been amazing, and actually, what we were trying to do is get DC to the table. So, I want to make sure that we're clearing up this misconception. DC was not at the table because they didn't own the land. They didn't have control of the land. So what we wanted to do and what we accomplished doing was to allow for the federal government to transfer control of the land to D.C., right? Now, D.C. has to decide what it wants to do. It's got a lot of flexibility to do whatever it wants with the land. And Governor Moore was incredible in terms of saying, we went to Governor Moore and we said, look, we just want D.C. at the table. And he said, look, I'm on board for that, but I want to make sure that if that's a direction that D.C. wants to go and you want to go, that you take care of Maryland also. And, of course, we were going to do that anyway. And so I think that there's no nothing has been decided, and we're going down both paths at once. And that was the whole conversation. So all that happened so far, and I was working pretty hard to get D.C. to the table because I thought it was the right thing to do. And now we got the hard work of figuring out the multitude of specifics that you need to figure out when you're doing something like this. And D.C. really has to decide what it wants to do.
Days after the RFK land became official in D.C. hands, you made, in your ownership group up with the Sixers, made a pretty surprising about face and reached a 50-50 partnership with Comcast on an alternative arena agreement there, as opposed to you financing a downtown arena.
Yep.
Are those two things separate, or can you see them as intertwined? And if you're saving money in Philly, does that mean there's more money for a Commander Stadium here?
Yeah, so, listen, first of all, they're not intertwined at all. They're totally separate situations, and obviously, we have the ability to finance both the arena and the stadium. They're totally separate situations, and so. And listen, ultimately, deals, about face. Deals kind of come. Ultimately, if you keep your eye on what's the best thing for the city, negotiations don't happen in a smooth way, and then you got to be able to pivot and willing to pivot, and when you think it's the right thing to do. And so we ended up in a great place in Philly, and I'm hoping we end up in a great place, and I'm very, very confident we'll end up in a great place here.
So. What you heard about the deal in Philadelphia where he was trying to build an arena in Chinatown and then backed off it, and now they're going to have a new arena for the Flyers and the Sixers in Philadelphia where they are, which is a great location. If you've been there before, you know what it is. They got the baseball stadium, they got the football stadium, and you got the arena. It's all there, and they got Xfinity across the street where you can eat and drink. And it's just a great setup. So they're going to stay there. And there was a story that he was going to pump in $1.3 billion for that. And it's a question I would ask, too, that Eric asked there, that, okay, you're not going to spend that money in Philly. Does that mean, freed up for here? And he says it's unrelated, totally separate. Okay, on that. But on top of that, you got the push from the NFL on that. He clearly wants to have it in D.C. Wes Moore probably wants to have it in D.C. I mean, the tax dollars for Maryland, okay, but the constituents, the people who vote for him in Maryland, they want the stadium in D.C. That's the whole thing. So it's going to happen. It's just going to take time. 2030 is the target date. Also interesting that the commissioner mentioned what it was like to see the monuments. I remember when Jack Kent Cooke rushed to build the mess that's there now in Landover. He liked the blimp shots on Monday Night Football where you would see the stadium lights and then the monuments lit up around it. That was a great look for everybody, locally and nationally, and he wanted to keep that. And he claimed that you could have the same blimp shot from the new stadium, which unfortunately for him opened as Jack Kent Cooke Memorial Stadium. Snyder changed the name to Redskins Stadium when he bought the team and then sold the rights to FedEx, and now it's Northwest Stadium, and it's going to be that way for the next 5 years. Harris is sticking to that timeline, 2030 opening, but all signs are pointing to D.C. It's just a matter of getting the deal done. And whether the money that was freed up by making the new deal that they have in Philadelphia, he says it didn't have anything to do with it, who knows? But I would imagine that it would be easier for him to raise the capital to build this, but I don't know anything about business. I mean, he's the one that's a billionaire, and he's the one that owns 3 teams, and he's the one that saved us from the purgatory of Dan Snyder. So I will certainly yield to him. More Super Bowl yak, all the kvetching about the Kansas City Chiefs getting calls. Goodell weighed in on that, as did Clark Hunt, the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Before I forget to mention this, Craig Laughlin is having open heart surgery today. He and Joe Beninati are the best play-by-play team in this area, hands down. They're great. I think all the other play-by-play teams would agree with that. Craig's been doing the games, I believe, for about 35 years on what used to be Comcast and is now Monumental. I think it was Home Team Sports when he started. Beninati's been with them probably 30 of those years, something like that. They're great. They're just great together. And Laughlin is such a great person and a great spirit, way he treats fans and other people. He's really been a treasure in this city for all these years. And depending on how you think of someone who's going through a tough time, do that, whether it's praying or just thinking about them. And that's what I do. I just think about this person who I've gotten to know over the years and like very, very much, both his work and like him very much personally. And, the hope is that he will recover from this in time to get back before the end of the season. I don't know if that'll happen, but certainly he should be back and all should be good for next year. So best of luck to Craig today. I will be thinking about him. Hopefully you'll be thinking about him, and hopefully he'll return soon. Alan May does a great job, and Alan May is great on the pre- and the post-game work as well. And I think Alan will tell you he would love to see Craig back behind the microphone at the games and back in the studio, and hopefully that can happen before the end of the year. All right, the big hubbub about the Kansas City Chiefs getting calls. Various theories on that. One is and I remember talking to Trey Wingo about this. I think it was last week. That they seemingly get all the calls because you see them all the time. They're on all the time. They were on every day of the week but Tuesday this year. So there's more software, I guess, more games to see, more action. And if it looks like they're getting calls, well, maybe it's perception, not reality. Although, when you isolate calls, you go, oh, God, they breathe on Patrick Mahomes, and it's roughing the passer. So yesterday, Clark Hunt, the owner of the team, inheriting the team from his father, who founded the Chiefs, Lamar Hunt, and also helped to found the AFL, which eventually merged with the NFL. So this is royalty family for football. And this was Clark Hunt's take on all this complaining about the Chiefs getting calls.
Yeah, it's something we don't take very seriously. I think, depending on what stats you want to look at, you could come up with any conclusion. There's certainly some stats that show us as one of the most penalized teams over the last 7 or 8 years. And I think it's only natural that you start having these kind of conversations when a team has a lot of success. I mentioned the Chicago Bulls already, just, thinking back to that era. There were a lot of commentators who made the same comments about the Bulls or Michael Jordan always getting the call. And I really think it was a case of the greatness of Michael Jordan and his teammates, more so than the referees having an impact on those games.
And then one of the plays in the championship game that people still talk about was the spotting of the football, in which Kansas City got the ball, and some thought that Josh Allen did get the line to gain to keep possession of it. The reason why I'm bringing this up is if the technology exists, and I think it's getting there, to spot the football using GPS, chips, lasers, and things like that, would ownership, membership be up for getting that on the field?
I absolutely think so. Something that I've seen over the last 10 or 15 years is a real willingness by the NFL ownership to embrace technology. That obviously starts with replay, which I think has made the game a lot better. There's no sense in having the fans at home who are watching on TV see something that should have been called or was called incorrectly and not have the ability to correct it. And so as we move forward, there'll no doubt be technological changes that'll make it easier for the referees to officiate the game and get it right, because at the end of the day, that's all we want. Who are associated with the league, we want the right calls on the field.
And again, I'm unfamiliar with what committees you're on. If this is a committee that you're involved in, do you know how close we might be to getting this technology used in the National Football League, Clark Hunt?
So I'm not a member of the competition committee, and I think that's the committee that would look at that first and bring it to the ownership. So I don't know where that stands.
Well, Goodell did address that yesterday at the news conference, and he said that they're examining that. I think it's inevitable that we get to that. What's happened really with television is the pictures are so good, there's so many camera angles, that we at home have a better view than the officials. And when we see these calls on the field, go, how can they make that call? Well, if you're doing this in real time, and I have stood on the sidelines of NFL games, and you see the speed, you see the collisions. I mean, it's a lot to keep up with, not to mention you got to look out for your own tuchus, because these guys are flying 100 miles an hour and weighing 250 pounds. So there's a lot to deal with down on the field, and I think that we will get to the point where the eye in the sky will tell us a lot more, and some of these calls, either way, can be overturned, whether it was an egregiously wrong or an egregiously right call. No, it can't be egregiously right. Egregiously wrong call, then they would be overturned. This again was Goodell addressing the same thing about the Chiefs getting all the favorable calls.
There's been a widespread perception that officiating has favored the Chiefs. Not my perception, public perception. How much of a concern is that for you in the league?
Well, this sort of reminds me a little bit of the script, right? That I write a script, and I have the script for the entire season. Listen, I think from a lot of those theories are things that happen in social media, and they get a new life. As you say, it's not your theory, but it's out there. Nobody wants it to be their theory. And so I understand it. I think it reflects a lot of the fans' passion. And I think it also is a reminder for us how important officiating is. And I think the men and women that officiate in the NFL are outstanding. They have the highest possible standards. That's ridiculous theory for anyone who might take it seriously. But at the end of the day, it's something we always have to continue to work on. How do we make our officiating better at all times? And if you look at the Chiefs' record, which I think is an amazing thing, people talk about the competitiveness of our league. The Chiefs, with their 15 wins, 15-2 this year, 11 of those 15 games were within one score. And I think that talks about the competitiveness of our game and the importance of how we officiate it, but also the competitiveness of how we play it.
You could also flip that around and argue the other way, that 11 of the 15 wins were by one score. One crucial call here and there determines the game. If they don't get, half a dozen of these favorable calls, do they win 15 games? Or of those 11 games that are decided by one score, how many go their way and how many go the way of the other team? hard to tell. But, the Chiefs have been at this a long time. They've been winning a lot of games. This is their third straight Super Bowl appearance, third straight chance to win a Super Bowl. They won another one. They're a dynasty right now. And, good teams find a way to win. This is what used to really anger me with Norv Turner, who was an outstanding coordinator with the Cowboys. He helped them win 2 Super Bowls. He's been in other places and has done really good work. But as a head coach here and in Oakland, he did get San Diego to the AFC Championship game. But he was here for a long time. I think it was 6.5 years, close to 7. And he always used to say, well, we make a play here, we make a play there, we win the game, it's a close game. Yeah, no. The good teams find a way to make that play. And he just never could get there. His teams made the playoffs one time, probably or had a chance to make it another time, but that was Dan Snyder's first full year, and he decided that, with a 7-6 record, he was going to change coaches, and the players were going to play harder for Terry Rubisky, and they were going to cruise into the playoffs. It's not the way it worked out. So, these when you argue that they win close games, you also have to look at, well, did they win close games because they got the benefit of the doubt on so many plays? Travis Kelce, really interesting stuff yesterday. And his brother, as you know, could have been in this game. He only retired a year ago. I give Jason Kelce credit for this. I don't think he's very good in everything that he does. He's good in some things. But, man, has he taken advantage of opportunities from doing his own show on ESPN, the podcast that he does with his brother. I think they get like $100 million in a deal that they have to put it out. The other commercials that he's done, reality stuff with his wife. I mean, it's pretty remarkable what he's done in a year. But had he decided to play one more year, we could have another Kelce match. And in some ways, I'm glad about that because I just thought it totally swallowed up the last time they met 2 years ago. And it was great for the mom who became this big celebrity, but it was too much about the Kelces. So now you only have one Kelce in this. And going forward, I guess we'll only have one Kelce in the NFL. He said last night, and indications are, I would think, he's 35 years old. He's got to be thinking about retirement. I guess it's tough to walk away after 3 straight Super Bowls. You want to win 4, and that he's still one of the top tight ends in the league. He's certainly the most famous tight end in the league because of his relationship with Taylor Swift. And this was a question last night, not just about playing next year, but playing for the next 3 years.
Where will I be in 3 years? Oh man, I don't know. Hopefully, still playing football. I love doing this. I love coming into work every day and. I feel like I still got a lot of good football left in me, but we'll see what happens. I know I've been setting myself up for other opportunities in my life, and that's always been the goal, knowing that football only lasts for so long. You got to find a way to get into another career, into another, profession, and I've been doing that in my off seasons, but for the most part, I plan on being a Kansas City Chief and playing football.
Well, he has said that the best Chiefs tight end ever is Tony Gonzalez. Tony Gonzalez, I think, played with Atlanta until he was about 38 or 39 years old, or close to it. He played a long, I think it was 18 years, maybe more. So is it possible that Travis Kelce is playing when he's 38 years old, 3 years from now, and who knows, going for his 6th straight Super Bowl? Crazy as that sounds. But in the meantime, he's looking at his legacy right now. And, sounds like he's given up on the idea of being the greatest tight end to ever play. He's going to go to the Hall of Fame. But in terms of being the best ever, here's his take on that.
Early on in my career, I really want to be known as the greatest to ever do it, man. I think that motivation has changed to just, create memories, create a lasting impression on the communities that I'm in, and change the game from where it was when I got in to where it is when I leave. And I think that's the biggest thing is, I've done all those things. I've made an impact in Kansas City. I've transition this game into, getting the tight end the ball a lot more. And on top of that, I've had a lot of fun doing it. And I think that's going to be something I can really hang my hat on.
Well, I think a little bit too much of a pat on the back for how many catches you make at the tight end position. I grew up watching a guy named Jerry Smith, who you can make an argument should be in the Hall of Fame. He was a very key receiver for Sonny Jurgensen in the 1960s and into the 1970s. He was a great player. And then others came along. Kellen Winslow, the father, was a Hall of Fame tight end, and I think was the first to catch 100 balls. Tony Gonzalez caught more passes, I think, than any other tight end. Mike Ditka was a pass-receiving tight end back in the 60s. John Mackey was a great receiving tight end. The tight end who blocks most of the time and catches a few passes here and there, we've been long past that. We're probably 40 years, maybe 50 years past that. So a little bit too much on that. Realize the history of the game, that there were guys catching a lot of passes at the tight end position before that. And they didn't have a quarterback who was able to run around like Patrick Mahomes and wait for something to happen and find him. Now, one thing that Kelsey does that I think is better than any other tight end, at least I've seen in my lifetime, is somewhere, somehow, he always finds the seam in the defense. I'm sure they have set pass patterns that he's supposed to do. But also, I think he's got a connection with Mahomes that Mahomes knows, okay, he's going to find that seam in the defense. He's going to find the open spot, turn around, I'm going to give him the ball. I think that's where his real changing of the game has been. He's just got this great sense of where the open part of the field is, and he's able to do that. So that's that on the legacy question. As far as what I was talking about earlier, the brother rematch, if in fact Jason had decided to play another year, here's what Travis says about that.
Of course I wish Jason was out there. Being at the mountaintop with your brother is something special that I'll never forget. Obviously, it's being so close to him retiring. I wish he would have played another year, but he's very content where he is in life right now, and I'm happy as hell for him. He gets to be around his family and his baby girls a little bit more, and I'll go out there and try to represent the family the best I can.
Yeah, and they did a little thing on that terrible show. I don't think they're going to bring it back, but the terrible show that Jason Kelsey did on ESPN, the late night show, and they kind of joked, who you're going to root for here, and it's a tough spot more for Jason because, his brother's playing in the game. He's not playing anymore, but the Eagles are his team. He's going to go into the Hall of Fame as a one-team player. He spent his whole career in Philadelphia. He represents the city in many ways, and he's never going to have to pay for a meal or a drink there again. So that's another angle on this. But I do like the fact that Mrs. Kelsey, the mom, is going to be concentrating on one player this time around, and we had that experience. It was kind of cool, and the embrace between the two of them after a very close game was touching and all that. But, it's time to move on from that. One more from Kelsey. This is, and what you'd expect him to say about as they've won 2 straight and now going for 3 straight.
This is going to be our biggest test yet. They got a lot of great players, but the biggest thing is they play great together. You can see their communication. You can see the accountability that they have, especially in the secondary. It's not going to make my job any easier, especially with those guys up front trying to get to Pat. So it's going to be a tough test, but I think right now we got a great game plan together, and we're going to keep, sharpening our tools.
The Yak yesterday dominated by the Roger Goodell news conference and that stuff, all the Super Bowl talk, and of course locally here, Josh Harris confirming that the name is going to stay Commanders and talking about what looks like an increasing possibility that they're going to get a deal done with the district, hopefully opening a stadium in 2030. But this came out yesterday. And, well, I guess both of them are really intriguing to the Commanders. One, Myles Garrett, who's had 4 consecutive seasons of 14 or more sacks. He's one of the top defensive ends in the league. He was drafted number one in 2017. He is one of, if not the top defensive player in the game. And he's not quite 30 years old, and he wants out of Cleveland. He's been a good soldier there. He hasn't really complained about all the mess that they've had there with Deshaun Watson and coaching changes and everything. The issue is he wants a trade, and they're strapped. I mean, the Deshaun Watson deal was an immense disaster for them. They're stuck with him, guaranteed money for another year. They are already more than $60 million over the cap for next year. The Commanders are $78 million under the cap, $78 million under. Cleveland is 60 over, plus Washington's got draft picks. They got 7 picks, not all of them their own. Some of the ones that they dealt in the Marshawn Lattimore deal and a couple of others, but they've got 7 picks. And, Peters may increase that. A lot of GMs like to do that, like to trade down and add some picks, so there may be some more in there. But as far as, getting Myles Garrett here, as great as it would be, and God, what a need that they would have at that position, plus the cap space to make it happen, it's a real problem for Cleveland. Trading him before June 1st would bring a dead cap charge of $36 million. If they trade him post-June 1st, that's a dead cap charge of $14.8 million, although a savings of almost $5 million. But they really wouldn't be able to do anything with draft picks because the draft had already happened. The draft is in April. That's why they have these deadlines. So if you're going to release him June 1st or trade him, you're going to have that issue. So it's not an easy thing to do. He's a 4-time Pro Bowler. He's not turning 30 until December of next year, so he'll be 29 during the next season. Love to have him here, but the question is, can they make the numbers work? Would he agree to restructure his contract? I don't know how those things work. Would that help them with cap space to make the trade happen? Who knows? But he's got 2 years left on a 5-year, $125 million deal. He's the highest paid non-quarterback, or was when he signed the deal in 2020. So I'd love to see him here. I think most fans would like to see him here. But I think economically it's going to be tough for Cleveland to do. I also, though, think it's going to be tough for them to play hardball with him and say, look, financially we can't do it. You're here under contract. If you'd like to play, there's your locker, there's your helmet. If not, you sit out, we don't pay you. So I think this will eventually get worked out. Whether it gets worked out here, that's going to be a real, look at what Adam Peters does and how he does things. He may have mortgaged some of the future for Marshawn Lattimore, who was kind of up and down when he was here, had a couple of good games and did not necessarily play very well in that, didn't play well at all in that Philadelphia game. He had some stuff, but they're blaming it on, he got here late, and he got to get acclimated, so let's give him a full off season and see what happens. But Myles Garrett, man, you'd love to have him here. And then this was odd yesterday, and it's an odd situation in Los Angeles with the Rams, because normally when you have a veteran quarterback like Matt Stafford, who's won a Super Bowl and says he wants to continue playing, you're looking at a contract and going, oh, God, it's got a number here that we can't deal with. Problem they got with him, or I guess a nice problem for him, is he's underpaid. So they got to pay him more money. And he's making like $24 million, which is very low for a quarterback these days. So they got to come up with the cash. And Cooper Kupp is the one. He didn't ask for a trade. He said that he's been told that the team will be seeking a trade immediately. He said, I don't agree with the decision and always believed that it was going to begin and end in L.A. Well, that's a kind of a pie-in-the-sky idea for any player. But during the locker room cleanout, he said there was no doubt in his mind he wanted to play in 2025 and he wanted to stay in L.A. His contract's not a killer. He signed a 3-year deal worth $80 million, just completed the first season of that, scheduled to have a cap hit of $29.8 million next year, $27.3 in 2026. His guaranteed salary, though, is only $5 million. So they could cut him loose for $5 million, I guess. And then if they trade him in a deal that's post-June 1st, they would save about $20 million towards the cap. So, a lot of different machinations with this. He's been in the league since 2017, but he came in as a 24-year-old rookie, third-round pick out of Eastern Washington. And in 2021, it was one of 2 seasons in which he played every game. He's played 33 games in 3 years since. So he's missing parts of seasons because of injuries, he's getting older, all that. And Puka Nacua is their number 1 guy. But that was kind of a surprise. And, look, you'd like to have both those guys, Terry McLaurin and Cooper Kupp, lining up opposite each other. Yeah, that would be pretty good. That would be pretty good next year. So things to keep an eye on. Coming up, more from Josh Harris from yesterday's news conference on how he feels after his first full season as owner. And Roger Goodell, more from him, the 18-game schedule. And what about Tom Brady and conflict of interest? All that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. I guess we can thank Mike Shanahan for taking the running back position, which was once manned by the likes of Jim Brown and Emmitt Smith and Gale Sayers and Eric Dickerson and John Riggins and many, many Hall of Famers, and going, I don't need that. I'll take Alfred Morris, 6th-round pick. He'll set a team record 1,500 yards. We're good. And the running back position has really been devalued over the last 30 years, maybe. And so it's making a comeback. And maybe the deciding player in this Super Bowl could be a player who was not on the Eagles 2 years ago when they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs, and that's Saquon Barkley. And we'll take a further look at his impact coming up a little bit later on. There's a lot of stuff locally to deal with. You know that the name of the Commanders is going to stay the same. Josh Harris confirmed that yesterday. In fact, if you have not heard this little soundbite here, I think this slams the door shut on any further talk about that.
Is it safe to say the Commander's name is around just to stay? Is that safe to say from your standpoint?
Yes. And we're actually, I think it's now being embraced by our team, by our culture, by our coaching staff. And so, we're going with that.
So it's a change from 2 years ago, in July of 2023, when Harris was introduced. And that was one of the questions: are you going to change the name? Because the change in 2022 from Washington Football Team to Commanders went over like a lead balloon, and the image of Dan Snyder and his wife standing up in those dopey Letterman's jackets, trying to tell us what a great name this was, and the rollout that they had with the 2-2-2-2, and Craig Melvin in Today's Show on the field with Doug Williams was down there, and Jason Wright, who was then the president of the team. It's a new day. It's a new day there, and frankly, the name thing. I was thinking about this, that the new president of the team, his first day was yesterday. His name is Mark Klaus, and he used to be the CEO of Campbell's Soup. Well, who knows branding and marketing better than Campbell's? And I'm guessing they had a lengthy discussion with him, or maybe it wasn't even lengthy. Maybe it was like Klaus said, yeah, just keep Commanders. It's good. You know, you made it to the NFC Championship game. Shut up and use that name. Or, maybe they looked at a variety of things with his background, and they determined that, with the success of the team, as Harris indicates there, and the way that they have changed the culture and all that, they're just going to stick with Commanders. And look, it's a long, drawn-out, expensive process. They're not going to want to go through that again. And people are just going to have to learn to get over it. I likened it to what happened with the Bullets and Wizards. Back in 1995, Abe Pollin was returning from the funeral of his good friend, the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, who had been murdered. And he thought about, gun violence in D.C., and he said, that's not a good name for a team in our city. And they had, I think he and his wife, Irene, came up with this name on the plane, Washington Wizards. But Susan O'Malley was the president of the team, and they had this big marketing thing where they, had people vote on it at Boston Market. Boston Market's still around. They used to make pretty good rotisserie chicken. Anyway, they had a voting thing, and they came up with Wizards, and a lot of people didn't like it, and there have been talk over the years that they might change it back. They're so irrelevant now that if they changed the name to the Bullets, nobody would notice. I mean, they stink. They won their last 2 games. Whoop-de-doo. They got 8 wins on the year. But people get over these things. And I also point out here that there are generations of people who have watched professional basketball in this town who are, not really tuned into the fact that the Bullets used to be their name. And my God, I mean, to remember when they won the championship, we're coming up on 50 years since that, 1978. So not a lot of us around who remember when they were really a good and relevant team. So, people move on. Same thing, the Colts. A lot of people angry that Irsay took the name Colts and logo with him to Indianapolis. The league didn't do anything to prevent that. But there are generations of people who grew up in Baltimore with just the Ravens, and they don't really know, or they've heard that there was a team called the Colts, but there's no connection to it. And my grandchildren are going to grow up being Commander fans, and that's just the way it's going to be. If you don't like it, just think of them as the Redskins in your mind, which they'll never go back to being, and use the term Washington Football Team. I think Tony still does that on PTI, and Tony wrote columns, by the way, years ago about the name change. He felt like if it was important to do it, they should. He even came up with something really crazy at one point that keep the name Redskins, but change the logo to a potato. That it would be a Redskin potato. But we're here. It's 2025. The team is good. The ownership is good. The coach is good. Most importantly, the quarterback is good. And people are feeling good, which is what Harris expressed yesterday at about a 26-minute news conference.
What I'm most proud of, I mean, obviously, there's a lot, honestly, that I'm proud of. But first of all, the leadership. I think I made the right leadership choices. And, Mark Klaus now in the building, in the business. We're going to be a lead on the business side. But I really feel like, as I said to you then, my most important 3 jobs were picking a coach, picking a GM, and then picking someone to lead the business. And I feel great about where we are and the leadership we have in place. Secondly, I feel super proud, obviously, of how excited and happy the Washington community is and the reawakening of Washington football. And that's everything from like how we played on the field and, what we did on the field. And really, obviously we won 4 games last year, and to be going to the NFC Championship, how can you not be proud of that? I mean, I'm very proud of that and very appreciative of the players and everyone who was involved in that. But also, listen, I wandered around. I made it a point of meeting a lot of fans in the stadium, outside of the stadium, and people are super happy here. And, people were literally crying in bars, and grown men, grown women, and it's really helped the happiness and the excitement, and there's very few things in the DMV that unites the whole DMV, and the Washington Commanders is like front of the list, and so that's probably the thing I feel most proud about, that people here are appreciative of Washington football again, like I felt when I was growing up. And so let's keep it going.
Yeah, we've had championships here in recent years. The Caps winning in 2018 and the Nationals winning in 2019, and not to diminish those things in any way. But the football team is different. And I've always felt this about Washington. There's very few blue-collar workers here. This is a white-collar town. It's a government town. And people work not 40 hours a week, but a lot of people work 60 hours a week. And the 3-hour window on Sunday, and, well, we're going to have a lot more games other days of the week, too, now that they're good. So Monday night, Sunday night, Thursday night, late in the season, Saturday, who knows? They're going to have games all over the place. But when those games are played, people can set aside that time and watch it. And Washington is always an event town. There's always big, presidential events. There's business events. Those things happen. And so this fits into it. And movers and shakers, that used to be one of the really cool things, is seeing who was in Jack Kent Cooke's box at RFK. And I think they had maybe 2 luxury boxes there. It's not like it is now. And so that's really what he's talking about there. And he experienced it as I did. I'm a little older than he is. I remember even back in the 70s when George Allen had good teams here. Yeah, that's true. This football team, when it's good, unites people more than anything else that happens in this town. I mean, we're a town that's divided politically. It's a political town. We got Democrats, we got Republicans. There's a natural divide. But when the football team is good, people feel good, and they feel good about that. As far as, where they are now versus where they were a year ago, as a matter of fact, yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the introduction of Dan Quinn. And I've said this many times, when Quinn was introduced, there was kind of a chuckle there when he said, oh, we're not talking about rebuilding, we're talking about recalibrating. And he did it. They didn't just recalibrate, they shot the expectations certainly through the roof, and exceeded them by making it to the NFC Championship game. Here's Harris on that.
Look, obviously, the season came out amazing and better than anyone expected, and no one could have sat where we were all sitting at the beginning of the season, where we had entirely, for the most part, a new coaching staff, a new front office. More than half the players were changed, but obviously, credit to Adam and Dan and their staffs for bringing everyone together, and credit to the players for making it happen on the field. And so, look, we got it. We've arrived, and that changes expectations. And I've lived through this before, and we welcome it. And we're just going to work harder and to create a situation where next year we win.
Yeah, and when he means we win, means we win the Super Bowl, because the only thing they came short of this year was the 2 wins to get to the Super Bowl and win it. And if you would have said that a year ago, that as 2025 is beginning, you're talking about a team that can win the Super Bowl, people would have thought you were nuts. So as we move forward here, and we've talked about Myles Garrett saying in Cleveland that he wants out, is financially that going to be possible to bring him here? They've got 7 draft picks. They got $78 million in cap room. Could they make that happen? We'll see. But I don't think anybody thought that you'd be looking to land an expensive 4-time All-Pro a year ago. I think a year ago when Dan Quinn said recalibrate, he's coming off or he didn't do it, but the team was coming off a 4-win season. So I think most of us thought, 7-8 wins would be great. Maybe you win 9. Maybe you have a winning season. And somehow maybe you slip into the playoffs. If you don't slip into the playoffs, the questions would have been yesterday, well, what do you have to do to become a playoff team? And what does Jaden Daniels have to do to take the next step? Well, those steps have already happened. He's there. He's a top 5 quarterback. He's going to win Rookie of the Year. He's shown that he's absolutely the coolest in the toughest of situations. That's a guy you want to get behind for a long, long time. And so now the window, which you may have looked at as being a much bigger one, now has narrowed to, the future is now. And that was one of the things that Harris addressed yesterday with this, somewhat unexpected success, and to put it mildly. What does that mean in terms of, how you handle free agency, the draft, trades, et cetera?
We all now experience what it was like here, right? And it was the reawakening of watching football here in the DMV and everywhere, right? Because there's lots of people who grew up with the team that I grew up with, and so anytime that you get that reawakening, right, the population at large is supportive, right? And so there's no question that there's some momentum, and we would hope to capitalize on it. But I mean, obviously, we're in dialogue with jurisdictions, with Washington, with Maryland, and really they're a big. What they want to do is a big part of it also, and so. And every indication is that everyone is supportive, and so we're just going to try to move it forward as fast as possible.
Hey, Josh, Sam Fortier with the Washington Post.
Hello.
In November, at a Bloomberg event with David Rubenstein, you said that D.C. would be the most politically viable because it would be the most accepted by all jurisdictions. I'm wondering if you still feel that way, and if you could explain your thinking there.
Yeah, look, I think that obviously the DMV, right, is 3 jurisdictions, and it turns out DC's in the middle. Plus, it's the location maybe, plus because of the history. It's location that when we do surveys is the most acceptable. But there's a lot of things that go into this, and we play in Maryland right now. We have an amazing relationship with Maryland. And like I said, it's not just our decision. Like, the decision is about the specific regions and areas and states themselves and D.C. itself. So, like, we have a lot of dialogue going with everyone, and we're going to keep pushing forward. That I continue to, kind of just be transparent about what the surveys say and how the area feels at large. But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of support in Maryland, a lot of support in Virginia. There is. But obviously D.C. is, kind of aligned with the history and happens to be the easiest place to get to for the most number of fans.
Isn't it cool when the owner of the football team uses the word transparent and nobody giggles? It's great. Yeah, he actually means it, that he's transparent. And it's pretty clear, that's why I left that part in the 48 question about building the stadium. He's wanting to build it in D.C. He knows everybody wants it to be built in D.C. And when this ultimately plays out, if it doesn't end up in D.C., it's going to be a shocker because there's just too many people pulling in the same direction right now. And they tried to play down that photo where Harris and Mitch Rales and Mark Ein, the 3 principal visible owners of the team, I guess, along with Magic Johnson, though his investment wasn't as big as theirs. But the three of them standing behind then President Biden signing the RFK bill. And then, when asked about it, don't read too much into that. Well, you can only play poker so well, and it looks like it's going to happen. So, man, I can't remember a February where it's felt like this. And you go back to the days of Bruce Allen on occasion holding these season-ending news conferences. Snyder never did it, but Bruce Allen held a couple of them, and he was grilled on a lot of things, and he dropped the winning off the field nonsense. And then when he made a change, when he fired Jay Gruden, he said our culture is damn good. It's just so refreshing to hear what's going on here, and to hear an owner who is, he can't tell you everything, understood. But he's not hiding anything, it looks like. And, looks like his hopes are your hopes and my hopes that they will have a stadium in D.C., and that'll be a great day when they announce that. And they're not going to rush to build it. That's another part of this equation, is when Jack Kent Cooke bought that land in Landover and renamed it Raljon for his two sons, which it never was, but he threw that up in a year and a half. That's a 3-year project. And so we're 2025. Let's say they get a deal done within the next 3-4 months. So we're getting to the end of 2025. You start to break ground somewhere in 2026, 27, 28. Okay, maybe you can get it open earlier, but I think they're going to want to get all the things straightened out. They want to get the right design for the stadium, all those things, and do it right. Because although stadiums don't last as long as they used to, you're still looking at the next 25 to 30 years once they get it open. And how it's going to be a multi-use facility. It's, no longer you build an open-air stadium to be used 10 times a year. That's not financially feasible anymore. So a lot of things are going to have to be taken care of in the meantime. But all systems are pointing towards what most of us want. That's a stadium on the RFK site. And the work on tearing down RFK has already begun. So they got to step up on that. Coming up, a couple more things from Roger Goodell. One on the 18-game season. How soon is that coming? We know it's coming. And Tom Brady, who's able to have this nice little side gig where he makes $37.5 million a year doing football games, including the Super Bowl this week. And, he's pretty much operating the Las Vegas Raiders. Conflict of interest? We'll hear what the commissioner says as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Rams coming up at 11 o'clock. A couple of obits, names you may remember from the 70s and the 80s. Remember Rich Dower with the Baltimore Orioles, kind of a utility infielder, 72 years old, played all 10 of his seasons in Major League Baseball with the Orioles. Pretty good player, hit 257 for his career, 43 homers, only 6 steals. Not a lot of steals for a small man, but he did play in 2 World Series with the Orioles. He appeared in all 5 games of the 1983 series against the Philadelphia Phillies. So that's 2 World Series. He's also won 2 college World Series at Southern Cal at USC, and then later transitioned to coaching. He was part of the Astros coaching staff in 2015 to 2017. Tragically, he had an aneurysm, needed emergency brain surgery during the Astros 2017 World Series championship parade. I guess that's the one where they were cheating. But he has another claim to fame. He appeared in the movie Stealing Home in 1988 with Mark Harmon, Jodie Foster, and Harold Ramis. But someone who's, I think, memorable, certainly to people who were fans of the Orioles back in the 70s and the 80s when they had those really good teams that were regularly in the World Series. They went 3 straight years, 1969 to 71. They won the middle one 1970. They also went back in 79. And they went back in, of course, 83, which was the last time that they won the World Series. So rest in peace, Rich Dower, passed away at 72. And also passing away yesterday at the age of 72, John Shumate. John Shumate had problems with blood clots, which hampered him early in his college career at Notre Dame. But when he came to the NBA, it really prevented him from having a really, any kind of a decent career. He was the 4th overall pick in 1974 and bounced around for 6 years, played for the Phoenix Suns, the Braves, Buffalo Braves, which are now the Clippers, and the New Jersey Nets. I remember him briefly playing for the San Antonio Spurs. But he's one of those guys that stands out for one game in particular. And this was January 19th, 1974 at Notre Dame. Digger Phelps was the coach there. And UCLA, which had last lost in 1971 to Notre Dame, that's when Austin Carr was playing at Notre Dame, they had put together an 88-game win streak with the Walton gang and others. But Bill Walton goes into this game having never lost a game in high school and had never lost a game in college, and was roughly 2 months away from completing a perfect college career. He had won back-to-back national championships. He'd had that incredible game against Memphis State as a junior where he was, I think, 21 of 22 from the field. He had 44 points. He was unbeatable. And when you name the top 5 players, really, in the history of college basketball, he's got to be on that list. And he comes in there with a team with real good future pros. I mean, they had Keith Wilkes, who was the 11th pick of the draft. He helped Golden State win the championship the following year against the Bullets when they swept the Bullets. Dave Myers, who was the 2nd overall pick. Marcus Johnson, who became the 3rd overall pick, but years later he was a freshman. He only played 4 minutes in this game. They had Tommy Curtis, who was the point guard. I don't think he played in the NBA. He may have played overseas. Whereas Notre Dame had 2 pros, one of them a future superstar, Hall of Famer, and Adrian Dantley, but he was a freshman. And it was John Shumate, Gary Brokaw, Dwight Clay, and I think it was Ray Martin was the other guy on that team. And they wound up beating UCLA 71-70. Notre Dame scored the last 12 points of the game. They shut out UCLA down the stretch, shut out the Walton gang down the stretch. Walton had 24 points in this game, but he did not get to the free throw line. And if you remember Walton playing, most of his points came inside. And that game where John Shumate, holds Walton in check enough that Notre Dame wins, that will go down forever. And John Shumate, who had blood clot problems as a sophomore, didn't play. Freshmen were ineligible then, had 2 really terrific seasons as a junior and a senior, and sadly has passed away at the age of 72. All right, more yak from Roger Goodell from his news conference yesterday. This has been discussed, and I'm telling you, it's absolutely going to happen because a 17-game season meant you're going to have an 18-game season. Nobody has a 17-game season. That's just to get you to 18, which they're eventually going to do. But this was Goodell's answer to Mark Maskey about the timeline for getting to 18.
Well, we haven't had any formal negotiating sessions about an extension. I'm certain it'll come up in the context of that in some fashion. It is something that Lloyd and I have had informal conversations about, but there's a lot of work to be done. We committed in 2011 when we signed a collective bargaining agreement that the players would not only have a say in that, but they would actually be able to prevent it from happening or support it from happening. We were able to do that when we moved to 17 games back in 20. And I think it's a large part because of the safety of our game, the advancements that we made in how we're training in the offseason, how we're training in the preseason, and trying to make that. And this year, the data on safety has been extraordinary. I think Jeff Miller went through that, and Alan Sills, our medical director, told you about it. The concussions are at a historically low level this year. We think that's a large result of the efforts that are being made, one, to improve equipment, but also the changes we make in the rules of the game, and also the way we train our players. So I think all of those are factors in how do we look at the offseason and how do we look at that with our partners, the players, and try to continue to make advancements in this case. And if we do, 18-2 might be a possibility, because we know that fans, I think, love football. They want more football, but we have to be incredibly sensitive and smart about the balance and how we deal with that. And I think that's something that I think we're all interested in focusing on, but it hasn't begun yet.
Got to be incredibly sensitive about the balance and focus. And then, all this safety talk, It's the perception of safety. That's what they want here. And, yeah, it's got to be agreed to by the union. They have that. Here's the way that works. The union, as they did with 17, says, we're not accepting another game. Yeah, 16-game season. It's too long. Shut up. Here's $1 billion. Okay, we'll take the 17th game. That's the way that works. The owners have the ability to open up the agreement. I think it's 2029, so you got another 4 years, maybe 5. I don't know exactly. But they will have the opportunity to get to 18 games. And you better believe they're going to get to 18. And Goodell has already been talking about 20. 20 is going to happen. And he spent a lot of time yesterday, by the way, one, on the diversity thing. There were a lot of questions about that because of what Trump and that administration is doing. You know, they have the Rooney Rule, and are they going to continue? Oh, yeah, absolutely, and they should. I mean, I don't think the Rooney Rule was enacted with any real pressure from the government. It was the right thing to do, and it's not perfect, but it's better than it used to be, and we now have maybe not as many as we should, but we have some coaches of color now, and we have coach. Let me see. There was a list on this of that I wrote down here. Here we go. The NFL has 5 black head coaches, with Aaron Glenn being hired by the Jets, with Mike Tomlin, of course, of the Steelers, Todd Bowles of the Buccaneers, D'Amico Ryans in Houston, Falcons with Raheem Morris, and then Panthers have Dave Canales, who, with a really crappy organization, did a good job this year. He's Mexican-American, and then Mike McDaniel is biracial. But, Goodell was right in saying that they're doing more with that. The more interesting part for me was all this talk about international, and Goodell at one point said, we are hoping to have an international team. That's going to be, would they have a team in London? And could they have a team in Mexico? No, I don't think so. Germany? I mean, I don't know how that works. And maybe if you compensate the players enough for living out of the country, it might make some sense. I don't know. But that's where they're going. And right now, he says they're going to have 8 of these international games. So football will start at 9:30 in the morning instead of 1 o'clock. But that's more money there. That's an untapped resource, and they want that, and they want to sell it. They can't open up the TV contract or the media contract for another few years. And based on what we've seen from the NBA and others, they lowballed themselves. There's more money out there for them, and they may double it. But in the meantime, they're going to be squeezing more out of Prime and Netflix and things like that. And that's one thing he made clear. So, look, the ratings for those 2 Christmas Day games on Netflix were incredible. He said 30 million people worldwide, and that's the audience that they're going for. I mean, they haven't maxed out the U.S., but, why not conquer a new world? Last thing from Goodell, and this is one where he's basically saying, yeah, so what? Tom Brady's on TV, and he's also pretty much running the Raiders, but we don't have an issue with that.
He's also, since the beginning of the year, been approved as a minority owner of the Raiders. And he's not just an investor. Pete Carroll recently called Brady integrally involved and said this is his opportunity to put his stamp on a franchise. I'm just curious, why does the NFL allow Brady to hold these dual roles? And is there any concern that he could gain an unfair advantage for the Raiders by being a Fox broadcaster?
Well, I'm not sure how he would, Ben, on that case. But let me start with the fact that everybody in the National Football League, owner to personnel, is still subject to tampering rules and other policy. They're responsible for that conduct, and they're all held accountable for that. In the case of this actual transition, as you know, we had special rules that were designed for this, for some of the concerns that some of the ownership had on this, and to make sure, as we learned a little bit more about this, where could there possibly be any kind of conflicts? That's something that, we'll obviously consider in the offseason and think about that. Should that policy be adjusted? Should something be added or subtracted? But right now, that Tom has been incredibly cooperative. He calls frequently about it and says, am I doing okay? And I think he's serious about making sure that he separates these two and he doesn't put the league or anyone in a position of conflict.
Well, it is a conflict. It is. It can't help but be. And they've handled it like, oh, he's not allowed to watch practice. He's not allowed to participate in these interviews that the broadcasters have, usually Saturday before the game. Come on. Let's not kid ourselves. And the calls that he makes to Roger Goodell, are they all, hey, am I doing okay, Raj? No, they're not. A lot of them are probably like Keith Hernandez in Seinfeld. I'm Keith Hernandez. Brady's got to go, I'm Tom Brady. I got this little side gig here that pays me $37.5 million. I've got big-time investments. I've got ownership in this team, which I am now calling the shots on, hiring coaches and GMs and things like that. So, yeah, come on. Let's be honest here. Let's be serious that no other owner has got, this kind of access, that it's okay for him to be talking to players down on the field and not necessarily like, how's your hamstring? It's, hey, Tom, give me a call in the offseason. Love to come to Vegas. It's out there. And whatever Goodell is saying, sure. I mean, you would expect him to say that as commissioner of the league, but it's a conflict of interest. It is. And, this is year one of this. There has been a lot of discussion that the last game that Brady will do on TV ever is the Super Bowl. He's denied that. He says, no, I got 9 years left on my contract and maybe beyond that, and I'm having a good time doing that. Yes, but I just don't see how the other owners can deal with this much longer. And it's okay now because the Raiders aren't very good. But if Pete Carroll puts together a team that's knocking on the door for the Super Bowl next year, you're going to see other owners go, wait a minute here. Wait a minute. We got Tom Brady as the front man, and 50 million people are watching him on a weekly basis, and the players who aren't playing are watching him. It's just too much, I think. And if I were an owner, I would be pounding on Roger Goodell to get your arms around this. You just can't have this. This is just too much of an unfair advantage for Vegas. But if they don't win a lot of games, nobody's going to make a lot of noise, at least right now. Anyway, that's a wrap for me. Bram is coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.